Hi, this is Press of Atlantic City Sports editor Mark Melhorn, and I'm here with our boxing writer, David Weinberg. Dave has covered Arturo Gatti's fights, several of them, at least 20 or so, Dave, would you say?
Yeah, I would say at least that many. Almost all the ones in Atlantic City.
And Dave's covered boxing for more than 20 years, so, I would say, I don't know if I would say, Dave, that, you probably wouldn't say he's the best fighter you've ever seen. I mean, would you say that, or maybe more exciting?
No, most exciting, yes. Best, not even close. No,
really?
I mean, Floyd Mayweather, those kind of guys all had more talent than him. And you talk to anybody that was around boxing for a long time, they would all say the same thing, that he was really exciting, maybe the toughest guy they ever saw in the ring, but that helped make up for a lack of talent.
Mm-hmm. What would you say if you had to name, what was it about his style that you think appealed so much to fans that kept coming back to Boardwalk Hall to see him fight?
He was kind of like a glorified club fighter.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of guy you would see at the Blue Horizon in Philly, or your neighborhood gym. Tough as nails, never took a backward step.
Mm-hmm.
Was willing to take 3 punches if he could land one.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just appealed to guys. Everybody, the people don't want to see boxing as an art form necessarily.
Right.
I mean, the purists do, but the general fight fan, they want to see that blood and guts and, knockout.
Action. Yeah.
Guys. Yeah, and he delivered that time after time.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that it was interesting in me reading your stories about him over the years was how he seemed to constantly have a struggle between trying to be a technical fighter, but then if he would go up a guy like a Mickey Ward or somebody who could get him into a slugfest, it was like that's out the window, and the street instincts came in or whatever, and it turned into almost a brawl a lot of times.
Right. If he was, his boxing skills were very underrated. I mean, he was able to outskill guys when he had the opportunity to,
mm-hmm.
and if the opponent let him do it.
Right.
But Buddy McGirt, Pat Lynch, all his handlers would always say, you want to get him in a slugfest, you just got to throw a punch back, and that's all it took. He had that macho mentality in there that he didn't want to outbox you if he didn't have to,
mm-hmm.
and he was more than willing to slug it out with anybody.
Would you say that maybe that greatest strength of his sometimes was a weakness too, especially later in his career, I guess? Yeah,
that was his downfall.
Mm-hmm.
He probably could have extended his career, another few years if he had not taken such a beating.
Mm-hmm.
I probably think it was, probably the Mayweather fight that he was never really the same after that. Mayweather just put such a licking on him that
right.
I think that kind of then you knew the end was pretty close, because
he
still had enough to get by the run-of-the-mill mediocre guys, but
mm-hmm.
then after Mayweather he couldn't even do that.
And that was back in 2005, right? And I remember there was a big build-up before that fight, and
it was huge.
I think you said in your story today that it was still the largest crowd ever to see a non-heavyweight fight. Was that what it was? Or
yep, it was 12,000, something.
Boardwalk Hall. I mean, just tell me if you can remember back to that fight or any of the other fights. I know you were at Mickey Ward, the third Ward fight. Was there something about the atmosphere at those fights that made it stand out from other fights that you've covered in Atlantic City?
I would say, it was more, there was an electricity with his fights that I hadn't seen since Tyson fought Spinks and Trevor Burbick and Larry Holmes
mm-hmm.
in Atlantic City. Even maybe George Foreman and Evander Holyfield, I think that was 1990.
Mm-hmm.
But since then, you really hadn't seen a fight that, even a casual observer wanted to pay to see.
Right.
Until Gotti came along, and it was really I thought the third Gotti Ward fight that really turned it around. I mean, he had that reputation. He had a couple big fights. He had won some and lost some, but the fact that they had fought twice before, and then that was the third meeting. And the way that they just went at each other for 10 rounds was just something that I don't think anybody had ever seen before. It was just
right,
all out. And no punches pulled.
Right.
I mean, they both wound up in the hospital with broken hands. They had cuts over both of their eyes. It was just a real brutal
mm-hmm.
display. And then that's kind of what gave birth to his legend almost. And then, after that, it was everybody wanted to see a Gotti fight because they never knew what was going to happen. Oh, they knew it was going to be exciting. They just never knew who was going to win.
Right. I mean, it's funny. You look at his past opponents. I mean, he's fought some very well-known guys. Oscar De La Hoya. He lost to him. He's fought Mayweather. You mentioned him, but a lot of people, I think, who are boxing fans always go back to those Ward fights as just legendary. I know I was watching some the other night on YouTube a little bit. Just I think it was round 9 was this one that was just unbelievable. The back and forth. I mean, you were at that third fight. I mean, what was it about Ward that just brought out these amazing fights? I mean, what was it about these two guys?
Ward was the same kind of fighter that Gatti was, and he had beaten Gatti the first time they fought. So he kind of knew Gotti's weaknesses and his strengths, and they knew each other so well that nobody could put anything past the other guy. And Ward only knew one way to fight, and that was the same way that Gatti fought, just straight ahead. Nobody took a backward step. They just stood in the middle of the ring and just went toe to toe with each other. One guy would get hurt. You think the fight was over. He'd go against the ropes, come back firing back. The next guy would get hurt, and it just went like back and forth. And that guy, I wrote in my blog today, that's the only time in my 20-plus years of covering any sport that I've ever applauded anything. Because, you're always taught to be, very impartial and businesslike, but the fact they poured everything they had into 10 rounds of action. I stood up and gave them a standing ovation. I've never done that before. So.
And you mentioned that those fights sort of catapulted him, and he had ebbs and flows in his career, and after that he was on a high, and it led to that Mayweather fight. And I know we sent you down to Florida right before that Mayweather fight to get a little bit more insight into who Arturo Gatti was. So just talk a little bit about what your impressions were of Arturo Gatti, the person, not necessarily the boxer.
Very down to earth kind of guy. I think that's another reason why people were drawn to him. He had no ego about him, but he did have his warts, like everybody does, I guess. He liked to party. He liked his women. He liked. He was kind of I'd just say he was a hard-living kind of guy,
right.
And not a whole lot of people were surprised that he met the end the way he did. Just the fact that he had been engaged a few times before, things were ugly with a few of his previous relationships. They didn't end well, and he never was he never had an attitude about him. Though that was the weird thing about it. He never. He was always had a kind word for people. I mean, he was always surprised when people came up to him for an autograph because he never thought he was anything really special. I don't think that, at least to the general public. When I was down in Florida, as a matter of fact, we played golf together one afternoon, and there were people coming up asking for his autograph, and he stopped and signed for 10 minutes at a time. There was no big deal. And then after we were done playing golf, we went food shopping. He could show me how he was getting ready for the fight, what he was eating and that kind of thing. Same thing, people coming up to him in the produce aisle asking for his autograph, and it was an inconvenience, which it would be for a celebrity, I guess.
Right.
Some guys don't, some guys prefer to be left alone, but he never shied away from that kind of stuff, which was one of the endearing qualities about him.
So, would you say, just to sort of wrap it up here, 20-some years of boxing that you've covered, would you say he's probably the most entertaining fighter that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, in terms of entertainment, I'll put him right up there with Mike Tyson when Tyson was in his prime. I mean, when he was, when Tyson was 19, 20, 21 years old, he was the baddest man on the planet, so to speak. And this was before all his legal troubles and his, own marriage fell apart and all that stuff. Everybody wanted to see a Tyson fight, just like they wanted to see a Gatti fight. So I would put Gatti on par with Tyson, but I might give Gatti the edge only because he sustained it longer. There were more, he fought more in Atlantic City and drew huge crowds every time he was there. I think Kelly Pavlik has the potential to do that. It'll be interesting to see what happens when he returns after losing to Hopkins the way he did his last time here. Whether the people from Youngstown will still follow him.
Right.
So he has the potential to maybe equal or at least approach Gotti's popularity, but that remains to be seen. I mean, as we sit now, Gatti was probably number one.